On a misty autumn morning in rural Nebraska, Ben Miller stands in his weathered farmyard, staring at the strange woman before him. Her pristine luxury car seems out of place among the rusty equipment, and her offer seems even more peculiar. $5 for his old John Deere tractor. Something about her polished appearance and insistent manner sets off warning bells in his mind. This isn't just about a broken-down piece of farm equipment. There's something else at play here. When local law enforcement gets involved, they uncover a pattern of similar incidents across 3 states, each involving seemingly worthless farm equipment and mysterious buyers. But what could anyone want with these rusted relics? And why are they willing to risk everything to get them? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Ben Miller watched the woman's silver Mercedes disappear down the gravel road, dust billowing in its wake. Her business card felt oddly heavy in his calloused hand. Agricultural acquisitions, printed in sleek black letters, nothing more than a phone number beneath. The morning mist was beginning to burn off, revealing the familiar contours of his family's land. 80 acres of Nebraska soil that had sustained 3 generations of Millers. "Dad?" Sarah's voice carried from the farmhouse. Porch. His daughter stood there in worn work boots and faded overalls, her dark hair pulled back in a practical braid. At 28, she was the spitting image of her mother, right down to the way she planted her hands on her hips when worried. "Who was that?" "Nobody," Ben said, but he couldn't shake the unease that had settled in his gut. "Just someone asking." About the old tractor, Sarah crossed the yard, navigating between patches of tall grass and scattered equipment with the ease of someone who'd grown up doing it. Her eyes fell on the rusted John Deere that had sat untouched behind the barn for the better part of a decade. "That thing hasn't run since I was in high school." "Hasn't run since before that," Ben corrected, tucking the business card into his shirt pocket. "Your grandfather was the last one to use it regularly." The tractor had been a source of gentle ribbing between them for years. Sarah wanted to sell it for scrap, along with the other retired equipment that dotted their land like mechanical gravestones. But Ben could never bring himself to part with it. Each piece told a story, of good years and bad, of drought and abundance, of the men and women who'd worked this land before him. Inside the farmhouse, the deed to the Miller farm hung in a simple wooden frame. The paper had yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. Benjamin Miller Sr. had signed it in 1952, his bold signature a testament to the pride he'd felt in finally owning his own land. Now, 70 years later, his grandson stood in the kitchen, pouring 2 cups of coffee from a pot that had been brewing since dawn. "Bills came," Sarah said, sliding a stack of envelopes across the worn kitchen table. Her voice was carefully neutral, but Ben could hear the concern beneath it. He nodded, adding cream to Sarah's coffee the way she liked it. The farm was getting by, but barely. Last year's drought had hit them hard, and equipment repairs ate into whatever margin they managed to scrape together. The modern tractors they relied on now cost more to fix than his father had paid for that old John Deere brand new. "We'll manage," he said, the same words he'd been saying since Emily passed 5 years ago. His wife had handled the books, transforming columns of numbers into strategic decisions that kept them afloat through the lean years. Sarah had inherited her mother's head for business, but even her careful management couldn't change the reality of modern farming. Everything cost more while crop prices stayed stubbornly low. "I know we will," Sarah said, but her eyes drifted to the window, to the equipment yard where the mysterious woman had stood. "But that's not what's bothering you, is it? What did she really want with that old tractor?" Ben pulled out the business card, laying it on the table between them. $5. She offered $5 for it. Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "That's weird. Even for scrap. It's worth more than that. Way more." "Exactly." Ben took a long, Sip of coffee, letting the familiar warmth steady him. And she was too interested in it. Kept asking about its history, if it had ever been modified, if we'd bought it new or used. Modified how? She didn't say, but she knew the model number without looking at it. Knew the year too. He shook his head. Something's not right. Sarah picked up the business card, turning it over in her hands. The morning light caught the glossy surface, revealing what looked like a watermark. A tiny symbol neither of them recognized. Should we call Sheriff Thompson? Ben thought about the woman's insistent manner, the way her eyes had darted around the property as they talked, how she'd seemed more interested in what was inside the tractor than whether it could still run. In 30 years of farming, he'd developed an instinct for trouble. Right now, that instinct was screaming. "Yeah," he said finally, "I think we should." Outside, the old John Deere sat silent in the morning sun, its rusted frame casting long shadows across the yard. To anyone passing by, it looked like just another piece of abandoned farm equipment, worthless, forgotten, waiting for the day someone finally hauled it away for scrap. But as Ben stared at it through the kitchen window, he couldn't shake the feeling that his father's old tractor was about to drag the Miller farm into something much bigger and much more dangerous than a simple sale. The Pleasant Valley Diner hadn't changed its decor since 1975, and that suited its regulars just fine. Every morning at 7, farmers gathered around the U-shaped counter, drinking coffee and sharing news that would never make the local paper. Today, Ben's story about the mysterious woman had everyone's attention. $5? Pete Anderson snorted, his weathered face creasing with disbelief. Hell, the scrap metal alone is worth $300 easy. Dottie, who'd been serving breakfast at Pleasant Valley since before most of the farmers were born, topped off Ben's coffee. A fresh copy of the County Herald lay beside his plate, its headline catching his eye. Agricultural equipment thefts rise across state lines. Funny you should mention that, Sheriff Thompson said, sliding onto the stool next to Ben. At 58, Thompson had the lean build of someone who spent more time working than eating, and eyes that missed very little. Just got off the phone with the boys over in Dawson County. They've had 3 similar incidents this month. The diner grew quiet, conversations dying as people leaned in to listen. Similar how? Ben asked, pushing his half-eaten breakfast aside. Well-dressed woman, expensive car, low-ball offers on old equipment. Thompson pulled out a small notebook. Difference is, over there she was interested in combines. Ancient ones, hadn't run in years. Offered $10 apiece. She get any? No, but 2 of them disappeared anyway. Night after she came asking. Thompson's expression was grim. Found one stripped down in a ravine. The others still missing. Ben thought about the woman's careful questions about modifications. You think there's something bigger going on? I know there is. Thompson lowered his voice. State's bringing in a specialist, guy named Mike Carter from the Agricultural Crime Unit. He's been tracking similar cases across 3 states. A burst of laughter from the corner made them all jump. Mary Wilson, who ran the feed store with her husband, was reading from her phone. Says here someone tried the same thing over in Kansas last month. Except there it was old grain silos, can you imagine? Offering pocket change for silos. World's gone crazy, Pete muttered, but Ben noticed Thompson writing something in his notebook. The bell above the diner door chimed. Sarah walked in, holding a folder that Ben recognized from their filing cabinet. She'd been digging through. Old paperwork since dawn, Dad, she said, ignoring the curious glances from the regulars. You need to see this. She spread several yellowed papers on the counter. They were maintenance records for the John Deere, dating back to when Ben's father owned it. Most were routine, oil changes, belt replacements, the usual wear and tear of farm equipment. But one entry from 1986 stood out. Custom modifications to internal storage compartments, Sarah read aloud. Commissioned by previous owner. Previous owner. Ben frowned. Dad bought that tractor new in '75. No, Sarah said quietly. He didn't. She pointed to another document, a bill of sale from 1985. Grandpa sold it that spring, when the farm was struggling, bought it back 8 months later for 3 times what he got for it. The diner had gone completely silent. Thompson was on his feet, phone already in hand. "Ben, I need you to keep that tractor exactly where it is. Don't let anyone near it until Carter gets here. Sarah, bring those records to the station." As if on cue, Ben's phone buzzed. "Unknown number." He answered, putting it on speaker. A woman's voice, not the same one from yesterday, came through clearly. "Mr. Miller, I understand you're unwilling to sell your tractor. I'm authorized to offer $50. Cash. No questions asked." Ben met Thompson's eyes. The sheriff nodded slowly. "Why this tractor?" Ben asked. "What's so special about it?" A pause. When the voice returned, its friendly tone had hardened. "Mr. Miller, some things are better left unasked. We'll be in touch." The line went dead. Outside the diner's windows, storm clouds were gathering over the distant cornfields. But the darkness, gathering in Ben Miller's mind, had nothing to do with the weather, and everything to do with the growing certainty that his father's old tractor was about to drag them all into very deep waters indeed. Mike Carter didn't look like anyone's idea of a federal agent. With his mud-splattered boots and John Deere cap, he could have been any other farmer stopping by the sheriff's office. But when he spread his case files across Thompson's desk, his expertise became clear. "Your tractor, Mr. Miller," he said, pointing to a photograph, "is a 1975 John Deere 4430, manufactured in Waterloo, Iowa. Standard equipment for its time." He paused, sliding another photo forward. "This is the same model we found in Missouri last month. Look familiar?" Ben leaned closer. The tractor in the photo had been cut open, revealing a complex network of hidden compartments woven through its frame. Sarah gasped softly beside him. "These modifications weren't random," Carter continued. "They're professional work, dating back to the mid-1980s. We found similar alterations in equipment across Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri, all from the same time period, all following the same pattern." Thompson crossed his arms. "Drug runners. That's what we thought at first." Carter shook his head. "But it's bigger than that. These compartments, they're older than the cartel's presence in the region, and they're more sophisticated than anything we've seen in drug trafficking." He pulled out a police report, dated 2 weeks ago. "Every piece of equipment we're tracking was briefly owned by one of 3 companies in 1985-86. Shell corporations, all dissolved by 87. We've identified 14 pieces so far, scattered across the Midwest. Your tractor makes 15. But why now?" Sarah asked. "Why are they suddenly so interested in collecting them?" Carter's expression was grim. "Because someone found something in one of them, something valuable enough to launch this recovery operation." He turned to Ben. "Your father, did he ever mention anything unusual about the tractor? Any strange incidents?" Ben thought back, trying to remember. "He never talked about selling it. Always acted like we'd had it since new. But he was different after 86. More cautious, started keeping records of everything." "Smart man," Carter muttered. "He probably knew they'd come back eventually." He pulled out a map marked with red pins. "Each pin represents a piece of modified equipment we've identified. Notice anything?" Sarah stepped forward, her eyes scanning the pattern. "They form a route," she said slowly, "from the Canadian border down through the Midwest." "Exactly. These weren't just hidden compartments. They were waypoints, part of an organized network." Carter stood, pacing the small office. "But here's what keeps me up at night. Half the equipment we've identified has vanished in the last month. Whatever's hidden in these machines, they're collecting it systematically, and they're not afraid to use force." As if to emphasize his point, Thompson's phone rang. The sheriff's face darkened as he listened. "Got it. On our way." He hung up, reaching for his jacket. "Break in at the Anderson place. Pete's fine, but his barn was ransacked. They were looking for something specific. Carter was already heading for the door. "Mr. Miller, we need to move your tractor to a secure location. Tonight." "The impound lot?" Thompson suggested. "No." Carter's voice was firm. "Somewhere they won't. Look somewhere with eyes on it 24/7. "I might know a place," Sarah said quietly. All eyes turned to her. "Mom's brother Jake. He runs that big repair shop over in Dawson County. Clean operations, security cameras, night staff, and he's got space in the back where—" A sharp crack cut through the air, distant but distinct. Thompson was on his radio instantly. "Report of shots fired, Miller Farm vicinity, all units respond." Ben's heart stopped. They'd left the farm unattended. "Move," Carter ordered, already drawing his weapon. "Thompson, take the main road." "I'll come in from the south. Mr. Miller, you and Sarah stay here." But Ben was already heading for his truck, Sarah right behind him. That tractor was more than just evidence now. It was their link to whatever had changed his father all those years ago. Whatever secret had been worth hiding, worth protecting, worth coming back for after all this time. As they raced toward the farm, storm clouds gathered overhead, dark and threatening. Thunder rolled across the prairie, nature's own, warning that everything was about to break loose. Ben's truck fishtailed on the gravel road as they rounded the last bend toward the farm. Through the windshield, they could see two black SUVs parked haphazardly in the equipment yard. Dark figures moved around the John Deere, their flashlight beams dancing across its rusted surface. "Call Thompson," Ben ordered, but Sarah was already dialing. A figure emerged from behind the tractor, carrying something that looked like industrial cutting equipment. The familiar sound of the old farm dog's bark was followed by a sharp yelp of pain. "Buck!" Sarah's knuckles went white on her phone. "Dad, they hurt Buck!" Ben's truck skidded to a stop at the farm's entrance. The headlights caught one of the intruders full in the face, a young man in tactical gear who looked more surprised than threatening. He dropped his tools, reaching for something at his waist. "Police! Freeze!" Carter's voice boomed from somewhere in the darkness. The agent emerged from the tree line, weapon drawn, moving with practiced efficiency. Sheriff Thompson's cruiser appeared on the opposite side, lights flashing. The intruders scattered. Two ran for the SUVs while another bolted toward the cornfield. But one, an older man with grey hair and wire-rimmed glasses, stood his ground by the tractor. He held up his hands slowly, but there was nothing surrendering about his posture. "Agent Carter," the man called out, his accent distinctly European. "Still chasing shadows across the prairie?" Carter's step faltered, just for a moment. "Kozlov, should have known you'd show up eventually. You never understood what you were dealing with," Kozlov replied calmly. "Neither did old man Miller. Such a waste." Ben felt his chest tighten. "You knew my father." "Knew him?" Kozlov laughed softly. "Mr. Miller, your father was supposed to be a simple courier. Just another farmer moving modified equipment through the network. But he got curious, started asking questions, found things he wasn't supposed to find." A metallic groan cut through the tension. Everyone turned to see the youngest intruder, who had circled behind them, attacking the tractor with a portable plasma cutter. Sparks flew as the beam sliced through decades-old steel. "Stop!" Carter shouted, but Kozlov pulled a pistol with surprising speed. "Let the boy work," he said. "Unless you want to explain to your superiors how you let a Soviet-era bioweapons cache fall into the wrong hands." The revelation hit Ben like a physical blow. Bioweapons in his father's tractor, all those years, sitting right there in his farm. A sharp crack echoed across the yard. Buck, limping but determined, had circled around and clamped his jaws on the young man's arm. The plasma cutter went flying, its beam slicing a wild pattern through the darkness before shorting out. Everything happened at once. Thompson tackled Kozlov as Carter charged forward. Sarah, who had quietly worked her way around the barn, switched on the giant floodlights they used for night harvesting. The yard lit up like daylight, exposing the remaining intruders who had been trying to flank their position. On the ground, multiple voices shouted commands as more police units arrived, their sirens cutting through the night air. The young man with the plasma cutter had managed to cut through to one of the hidden compartments. As officers secured the scene, Carter approached the tractor cautiously, his flashlight beam probing the exposed cavity. "Empty," he announced, the tension in his voice unmistakable. "They've already retrieved the contents." Kozlov, now in handcuffs, smiled thinly. "Did you really think we wouldn't have gotten here first? That compartment was cleared 30 years ago. We just needed to verify and to tie up loose ends." "The other equipment," Sarah said suddenly. "The combines, the silos. You're not collecting old bioweapons. You're destroying evidence." "Smart." "Girl," Kozlov nodded approvingly. "But ask yourself, evidence of what? And more importantly, evidence for whom?" Before anyone could respond, the sound of approaching helicopters filled the air. Carter touched his earpiece, listening intently. "FBI's here," he announced, "and they're bringing a hazmat team. Everyone clear the area." As they walked away from the tractor, Ben noticed Buck still growling at something near its back wheels. Sarah aimed her flashlight at the spot. There, barely visible behind decades of rust and dirt, was a small panel they'd never noticed before, and carved into its surface was a series of numbers. A code, or maybe coordinates, along with a single word in Cyrillic script. Ben's father had known, had discovered something so dangerous he'd spent the rest of his life keeping it hidden. And now, watching federal agents swarm his family's farm, Ben realized that finding the truth might cost him everything his father had worked so hard to protect. Dawn painted the farm in surreal shades of orange and blue. Hazmat-suited figures moved methodically around the old John Deere, now surrounded by portable floodlights and yellow crime scene tape. The FBI's mobile command center hummed in the distance, a stark reminder of how much had changed in 24 hours. "They found traces," Carter said, joining Ben and Sarah on the porch. "Residual contamination in the seals of the compartments. Nothing dangerous now, but enough to confirm." Kozlov wasn't lying about the bioweapons. Sarah wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, her eyes fixed on Buck, who lay at her feet with his leg freshly bandaged. "But why would the Soviets use farm equipment?" "Hide in plain sight," Ben said quietly. "Who looks twice at a broken-down tractor?" The crunch of tires on gravel drew their attention. A familiar silver Mercedes rolled into the yard, navigating between FBI vehicles with practiced ease. The woman from yesterday stepped out, her designer suit replaced by tactical gear, similar to what Kozlov's men had worn. "Mr. Miller." Her accent matched Kozlov's. "I see we're past the point of polite offers." Carter's hand moved to his weapon, but she held up a phone, showing a video feed. "I wouldn't. My associates are currently parked outside Pete Anderson's house. His grandchildren are there, yes? Such precious ages, 5 and 7. What do you want?" Ben's voice was ice. "The same thing we wanted yesterday. The tractor, specifically what's behind that panel your dog so helpfully revealed." She smiled thinly. "Kozlov was always too careful, too methodical. But we knew watching him would lead us to the last piece." "Last piece of what?" "Insurance, Mr. Miller. Your father didn't just find evidence of weapons, he found proof of who funded them. American names, powerful people who spent decades burying the Cold War secrets." She glanced at her watch. "You have 1 hour to clear the FBI away and give us access to that panel. After that, well, Pete's grandchildren won't be the only ones at risk." Sarah stood, fury radiating from every inch of her frame. "You're bluffing. The FBI has the farm surrounded." "Does it?" The woman gestured to the perimeter. "Count the agents, Ms. Miller. Notice how many have quietly disappeared in the last hour, how many are actually our people." She turned to Carter. "Your superiors have already been contacted. Check your phone." Carter's face hardened as he read something on his screen. "They're ordering us to withdraw. Full tactical retreat." "Of course they are." The woman's smile widened. "Some of those Names I mentioned, they never really left their positions of power. They just got better at hiding. Ben thought of his father, who'd carried this secret for decades, who'd bought back the tractor at 3 times its worth to keep its evidence safe, who'd spent the rest of his life watching, waiting for this moment. 1 hour, the woman repeated, turning to leave. And Mr. Miller, don't bother trying to remove the panel yourselves. The fail-safes your father installed would render everything inside unusable. We need our equipment, our expertise. She paused at her car. Oh, and don't worry about Kozlov. He's already been dealt with. As the Mercedes pulled away, Carter was already on his phone, talking rapidly in coded phrases. Sarah had moved to the yard, watching FBI agents slowly withdrawing, trying to identify which ones might be imposters. But Ben's eyes were fixed on the tractor, on the panel that held whatever truth his father had deemed worth protecting at any cost. The morning sun caught the rust-streaked surface, and for a moment he could almost see his father there, younger, stronger, making the choice to stand against forces he couldn't possibly defeat alone. "They'll kill us anyway," he said quietly. "Once they have what they want, we're just loose ends." Carter nodded grimly. "Most of my team's been compromised, but I have a few people I trust absolutely. If we're going to move against them, it has to be now." Sarah rejoined them, Buck limping loyally at her side. The feed on her phone, I recognize Pete's house. But those weren't his grandkids. The videos from last summer's county fair. I used to babysit them. I know what they look alike. Ben felt something his father must have felt all those years ago, the weight of a choice that would ripple across decades. "Then we've got 1 hour to set a trap, and this time we're not playing defense." Thunder rumbled in the distance as storm clouds gathered once again over the Miller farm. But for the first time since the woman's initial visit, Ben felt the faintest glimmer of hope. They had one advantage she hadn't counted on. This was their land, their home, their legacy. And Miller's didn't give up without a fight. The Pleasant Valley Diner had never hosted a war council before, but there was a first time for everything. With the FBI pulled back and cell phones turned off, farmers filled the booths, their faces grim with determination. Dottie had flipped the closed sign and was pouring coffee like it was ammunition. "They're watching the main roads," Pete Anderson said, spreading a hand-drawn map across the counter. "But there's not a drainage ditch or fence line for 20 miles that any of us don't know by heart." Mary Wilson nodded, jabbing her finger at various points on the map. "Got 4 combines ready to roll. They make enough noise to cover whatever we need to do." Ben watched the farmers coordinate with the ease of people who'd spent lifetimes working together. Carter stood beside him, expression caught between professional concern and grudging admiration. "This is technically obstruction of justice," the agent muttered. "Only if they were really federal agents," Sarah countered, marking positions on the map. "Besides, when did justice have anything to do with this? Sheriff Thompson arrived with 3 deputies he personally vouched for. Got word from my friend in the state police. Whatever's happening, it goes high up. They've been ordered to stay clear of the whole county." "Good," Ben said. "Means we only deal with the people we can see." The bell above the door chimed. Jake, Sarah's uncle, walked in carrying a thick service manual. "Found it in my shop records. Full schematics for that model tractor, including some custom modifications I never understood until now." He spread the manual open, revealing detailed diagrams. "The panel thereafter, it's got a false back, 2-stage release mechanism. You try to force it, the whole thing floods with corrosive agent." "Dad knew what he was doing," Sarah said softly. "He made sure they'd need more than just muscle to get to whatever's inside." The farmers gathered around the diagrams. Years of repairing their own equipment made them natural problem solvers, and soon they were plotting out angles of approach, blind spots, and defensive positions. "We've got an hour," Carter reminded them. "Less now. An hour's plenty," Pete said. "Used to raise this many acres with half the daylight and a third of the help." Mary returned from her truck with a stack of 2-way radios. "CB channels," she explained. "Old school. They won't be monitoring these." Outside, the sound of combines starting up rolled across the prairie like distant thunder. The Wilson boys were already moving their machines into position, creating a wall of steel and noise that would give them cover. "Remember," Ben addressed the group, "they're expecting to find a broken family and a scared community. Let's show them what they're really dealing with." Sarah unfolded a newer map, this one marking the locations of every piece of equipment on their land. "We've got the home field advantage. Let's use it." The farmers dispersed like a well-oiled machine, each knowing their role. Thompson's deputies positioned themselves at key points along the back roads, ready to redirect any unwanted attention. Buck, legs still bandaged, stood guard by the diner door, his ears perked for any unfamiliar sound. He'd already proven himself, more valuable than any security system. Carter watched the coordination with growing respect. "You know," he said to Ben, "I've seen military operations with less precision than this." "That's because they don't understand," Ben replied. "This isn't just about one tractor or one piece of evidence. This is about protecting our own. Always. Has been." Through the diner's windows, they could see the storm clouds gathering again, nature itself seeming to align with their plans. But this time, instead of feeling threatened by the darkness, they were counting on it. Sarah checked her. "Watch. 20 minutes until they expect an answer." Ben nodded, feeling the weight of his father's legacy and his community's trust. "Then let's get into position. Time to show them what happens when they threaten one of our own." The farmers moved out, into the gathering storm, their trucks and tractors disappearing down familiar roads like a ghostly cavalry. The trap was set. Now all they had to do was spring it. Sarah's flashlight beam cut through decades of dust in the farmhouse attic. With 15 minutes left until the deadline, she was making one final sweep, guided by a nagging suspicion about her grandfather's record-keeping habits. "Come on," she muttered, moving boxes aside. "Where would you hide it?" Her hand brushed against something behind an old steamer trunk. A leather-bound ledger, its spine cracked with age, slid into view. Inside, columns of numbers and cryptic annotations filled pages yellowed by time. "Dad," she called down the stairs, "I found something." Ben and Carter hurried up, ducking under low rafters. Sarah was already spreading pages across the floor, her fingers tracing entries. "Look at this," she said. "Grandpa didn't just keep equipment records. He was mapping their whole operation. The ledger told a story in numbers and codes, delivery dates disguised as maintenance records, routes hidden in mileage logs, equipment transfers that made no sense unless you knew what to look for. These aren't just random modifications," Sarah explained, excitement building in her voice. "Each piece of equipment was part of a larger network. The combines in Kansas, the silos in Missouri, they were all connected." Carter leaned in, professional interest peaked. "Connected how?" Sarah pulled out her phone, opening a local history website. "Remember last year when they found those old bootlegging tunnels under Pleasant Valley, the ones that supposedly ran all the way to Canada?" Understanding dawned on Ben's face. "The smuggling routes. They didn't just disappear after Prohibition." "Exactly." Sarah overlaid the ledger's coded coordinates with a modern map. "The Soviets didn't create new routes. They used ones that already existed, ones that had been working for decades." Crackle from their CB radio interrupted the revelation. Pete's voice came through. "Heads up, 3 black SUVs just turned onto County Road 8. "They're early," Carter muttered. But Sarah wasn't listening. She'd found something else in the ledger, a loose page covered in her grandfather's hurried handwriting. "Final shutdown protocol," she read. "In case of compromise, system can be purged through primary node." "Dad, I think Grandpa left instructions for destroying whatever's in that panel." "But how?" Ben asked. "The woman said we couldn't access it without their equipment." Sarah's eyes lit up with the same determination her mother used to show when solving a particularly tough problem. "No, she said we couldn't remove the panel. But according to this, we don't need to. The evidence can be destroyed remotely if you know the right sequence." She pointed to a series of diagrams in the ledger. These modifications weren't just about hiding things, they were about protecting the network. Each piece of equipment was connected, and they all led back to one place. The tractor, Carter said. Not just the tractor. Sarah turned the page, revealing a detailed map of the Miller farm. Everything. The whole property. Grandpa didn't just hide evidence. He built a fail-safe into the land itself. Another crackle from the radio. Second set of vehicles spotted on Ridge Road. Box trucks this time. Look military. Ben studied the map. Decades of farming, the same land lending weight to his observations. These marks here, they're not random. They follow the old drainage system, the one Dad updated in '86. After he bought the tractor back, Sarah nodded. He wasn't just installing drainage tiles, he was building something bigger. Carter's trained eye caught the pattern. A destruction network. If these routes are what I think they are, triggering that failsafe would destroy evidence across the entire property and probably take half the farm with it, Ben added grimly. Sarah met her father's eyes. Maybe that's the point. Grandpa knew someday they'd come back. He made sure we'd have a way to stop them, even if it meant sacrificing everything. The radio crackled again. 10 minutes to deadline. Everyone in position. Ben took the ledger, his weathered hands gentle with this last piece of his father's legacy. We've got what we came for. But Sarah, are you sure about these instructions? One wrong move. I'm sure, she said, her mother's determination shining through. Grandpa was an engineer before he was a farmer. Everything he built had a purpose. They descended from the attic into the gathering dusk, the ledger heavy with 3 decades of secrets. Outside, combines rumbled in the darkness, masking the movement of farmers taking their positions. The trap was set, but now they had something even more valuable. A way to destroy the very thing their enemies had come to claim. Through the window, the old John Deere sat silent in the yard, no longer just a rusty piece of equipment, but the key to a system built by a man who'd understood that sometimes the only way to protect something was to be ready to destroy it. The FBI's mobile command center sat abandoned in the growing darkness, its banks of electronics still humming. Carter had repurposed it as their base of operations, using the surveillance equipment to track movement around the farm's perimeter. 3 teams, he said, pointing to thermal imaging displays. Main force coming up the access road, 2 flanking units trying to be subtle about crossing the backfields. He switched channels on the CB radio. Pete, you seeing the ones by the south fence? Got 'em, Pete's voice crackled back. Mary's combine is making enough noise to cover Jake moving the grain truck into position. Ben studied the screens, seeing his land through new eyes. Every drainage ditch and tree line they'd used for cover during harvest now served a different purpose. The Wilson boys had positioned their machines to create blind spots in the approaching team's lines of sight, while Thompson's deputies maintained a discreet perimeter beyond the property line. Sarah sat with the ledger open, cross-referencing its cryptic notes with the farm's layout. According to Grandpa's notes, the destruction system's trigger point is tied to the tractor's electrical system, but it needs power, more than just a battery. The generator shed, Ben said. Your mother always wondered why Dad insisted on such heavy-duty equipment for a small farm. A new voice came over the CB. Heads up, main group stopping at the gate. Looks like our friend in the Mercedes is back, and she brought company. Through the command center's cameras, they watched the woman emerge from her car. She changed into what looked like tactical gear, but still moved with the same confident grace. 6 men flanked her, carrying specialized equipment cases. Mr. Miller? She called out, her voice carrying clearly through the evening air. I see you've cleared away the federal presence. Wise choice. Now, shall we discuss the transfer of property? Ben reached for the radio handset, but Sarah stopped him. Wait, look at how they're spreading out. They know it's a trap, Carter nodded. But they don't know what kind. He switched to a different CB channel. All units hold position. Let them commit to their approach. The woman's team began advancing up the drive, moving with professional precision. Their equipment cases proved to be packed with sophisticated scanning gear and what looked like specialized cutting tools. They came prepared for Dad's security measures, Sarah observed. Maybe not all of them, Ben said. He keyed the radio. Jake, you in position. Ready. When you are. Buck's with me. He remembers which one of them kicked him. The woman's team reached the tractor, immediately setting up portable lights and scanning equipment. The woman herself stayed back, directing operations with hand signals while keeping her attention on the farmhouse. Time to say hello, Ben said. Stepping out onto the porch, Sarah and Carter flanked him, deliberately visible. Ah, the whole family, the woman called out, and Agent Carter still playing Boy Scout. I assume by now you've discovered the fuller scope of what we're dealing with? We know about the smuggling routes, Sarah answered, about how you used existing networks to move Soviet weapons and intelligence. The woman smiled. Very good. Then you understand why we can't leave any traces. The people who arranged this system, they've spent 30 years climbing to positions where exposure would be problematic. You mean they've spent 30 years hiding what they did? Ben said. Like cowards. Cowards? The woman's smile hardened. Your father understood the reality of the situation. Why do you think he built in those fail-safes? Speaking of which, she gestured, and one of her men raised what looked like a signal detector. We've picked up some interesting power readings from your generator shed, planning something dramatic. Sarah tensed beside Ben. They'd known the equipment might be detected, but not this quickly. Here's what's going to happen, the woman continued. My team will disarm the failsafes, retrieve the contents of that panel, and then we'll have a thorough discussion about everyone's continued well-being. I'd prefer to avoid unpleasantness, but she nodded toward the fields where more figures could be seen moving in the darkness. Ben felt the weight of his father's ledger in his jacket pocket. One signal would trigger the destruction system, erasing 30 years of evidence along with most of his family's legacy. Another would launch their trap, gambling everything on the planning and determination of a small farming community against trained operatives. The woman checked her watch. 2 minutes, Mr. Miller. Then my team starts working with or without your cooperation. And I should mention, we've already disabled the drainage system you so cleverly wired up. Insurance? You understand. But Sarah was smiling, and Ben knew why. His father hadn't just built one failsafe, he'd built redundancies. And right now, Jake was connecting the most important one of all to the one piece of equipment they'd never think to check. Thunder rolled across the prairie as Ben raised the radio to his lips. All units, he said clearly, knowing the woman would hear. Execute Plan B. The night erupted into chaos. The night erupted. The vintage photograph had sat on Ben's mantle for decades, his father and grandfather standing proudly beside the John Deere on Delivery Day 1975. But now, as chaos erupted across the farm, Sarah noticed something in the image she'd never seen before. In the background, partially obscured by shadows, stood a man in a suit, watching. Dad, she said, holding up the photo as they crouched behind the command center. Look who's behind Grandpa. Ben's eyes widened. Kozlov, 30 years younger. But that's him. The woman's voice cut through the darkness, unnaturally calm amid the mayhem. Your grandfather was an interesting man, Mr. Miller. Did you know he worked on classified engineering projects during the Korean War? His expertise in creating hidden compartments didn't start with tractors. Through the monitors they watched, her team continuing their methodical work on the tractor, seemingly unfazed by the combines roaring to life around them. But Ben noticed their formation had tightened, betraying their unease. It was never about smuggling weapons, Carter said quietly, pieces falling into place. The weapons were a cover. This was about moving people. Sarah opened the ledger to a page filled with numbers. These aren't maintenance dates. They're passport numbers. The truth hit Ben like a physical blow. His father hadn't just been protecting evidence of weapons trafficking. He'd been protecting a record of every defector, agent, and asset moved. through the underground railroad of modified farm equipment, names that could unravel decades of carefully constructed lives. "Your father discovered the truth by accident," the woman called out. "A routine maintenance check revealed one of the compartments, but instead of reporting it, he did something unexpected. He started helping us." "Until you betrayed him," Ben answered, remembering his father's change after '86. "Until someone on your side started selling information back to the Soviets." A pause. When the woman spoke again, there was genuine surprise in her voice. "So he did tell you something?" "He told me enough." Ben met Sarah's eyes, seeing the same realization dawn. The names in that panel, they're the traitors. The ones who turned. The woman's laugh held no humor. "Very good. Now you understand why certain parties are willing to go to such lengths to retrieve that list. 30 years of climbing through American institutions, building influence, gathering intelligence, all traceable through one old farmer's meticulous record-keeping." A new sound joined the combine's roar, the distinctive rumble of Jake's grain truck moving into position behind the barn, right where Ben's father had installed the farm's main power junction 3 decades ago. "You said you disabled the drainage system," Sarah called out. "But that's not where the real fail-safe is it? A drainage system can be mapped, traced, shut down, but the one thing everyone overlooks on a farm is the equipment that's supposed to be broken." Ben finished. The woman's team had finally noticed the grain truck. One of them raised a scanner, and their leader's composed expression cracked for the first time. "The tractor," she said, "it's not connected to the power grid. It's drawing power from every piece of equipment on the farm," Sarah confirmed. "Grandpa didn't just build a fail-safe. He built a distributed power system disguised as broken-down machinery. And right now, it's charging up to deliver one hell of a surge." Ben raised the radio again. "Jake, connected and ready. Buck says, 'Hello to the guy he bit.'" The woman's cool facade vanished. "Stop them!" she shouted, but her team's hesitation proved fatal. They'd trained for military opposition, not for farmers who knew every inch of their land and exactly how much voltage their equipment could channel. "One last chance," Ben called out. "Leave now, or we overload every piece of modified equipment on this farm. 30 years of evidence gone in one surge. Your choice." Thunder rolled again, closer now. The woman looked at her scanner readings, then at her increasingly nervous team. For the first time, she was facing opponents who had nothing left to lose, and a legacy worth destroying to protect. The next move would determine whether Ben's father's final gambit would end in triumph or tragedy. But looking at Sarah's determined face, Ben knew they'd already won something more important. They'd understood why their family had chosen this land, this life, and these secrets to protect. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the tableau frozen across the Miller farm. The woman's team had spread out defensively around the tractor, their equipment hastily abandoned. Jake's grain truck hummed with building electrical power, its connection to the old John Deere creating an almost visible current in the air. "You're bluffing," the woman said, but her voice had lost its edge. "Destroying the evidence would serve no purpose now. We already know who's on that list." "Do you?" Sarah stepped forward, her grandfather's ledger held carefully. "Because, according to these records, there were multiple lists, multiple compartments. Dad's notes suggest he found a pattern in who accessed which ones." Carter moved to flank the woman's position. "She's right. Your people have been chasing fragments, thinking you knew the whole picture. But this was designed as a proper intelligence operation, compartmentalized, redundant, with built-in authentication. The distant sound of sirens carried on the wind. Thompson's deputies had sealed off the access roads, but more vehicles were approaching. The woman smiled thinly as she heard them. "That will be our backup arriving. I warned you about involving local law enforcement." "Did you?" Ben nodded toward the road. "Because those sirens are coming from the wrong direction for your people. Through the command center's monitors, They watched unmarked vehicles approaching from the north, not the sleek SUVs of the woman's organization, but heavy-duty tactical units. "Remember what you said about Kozlov?" Carter's voice carried across the yard. "About him being dealt with? Turns out he had his own insurance policy, one that activated the moment your people moved against him." The woman's composure cracked further. "You're working with Kozlov?" "No," Sarah said. "We're letting Kozlov's enemies work for us. The ones who never knew about this farm, about the lists, about any of it. The ones who've spent 30 years wondering how so many of their operations got compromised." Ben watched understanding dawn on the woman's face. By eliminating Kozlov, she'd broken a stalemate that had protected everyone involved. Now, forces that had been searching for answers for decades were converging on the farm. "Jake," Ben called, into the radio. "How's our power level? Gauges are redlined. Buck says we've got maybe 2 minutes before something blows." The woman raised her hand, and her team tensed. "If you trigger that surge, you'll destroy everything. Not just the evidence, but the entire property, your home, your legacy." "Our legacy." Ben felt decades of his father's quiet determination flowing through him. "Our legacy isn't this land. It's not even what's hidden in that tractor. It's the choice Dad made when he discovered what was happening here. The choice to protect people who risked everything for freedom." Sarah stepped up beside him. "And now we're making the same choice." The woman's team was starting to back away from the tractor. They could feel the electricity building in the air, making hair stand on end and creating a metallic taste on the tongue. The first fat drops of rain began to fall. "Last chance," Ben said. "Walk away. Let whatever's coming sort itself out without you. Or stay and watch 30 years of secrets burn." Through the command center's screens, they could see the approaching vehicles more clearly now. Multiple agencies, multiple interests, all converging on the farm. The woman looked at her scanner readings one last time, then at her increasingly nervous team. "Pull back," she ordered finally. "Grab what you can, quickly." But as her men hurried to collect their equipment, Sarah noticed something in her stance, a tension that hadn't been there before. "Dad," she whispered. "She's not giving up. She's switching to Plan B." Before Ben could respond, the woman pulled something from her tactical vest, a small device with a blinking light. "I really didn't want to do this, Mr. Miller, but if we can't extract the evidence cleanly—" She pressed a button, and a high-pitched whine filled the air. Sometimes a controlled burn is the next best thing. The old John Deere's engine coughed once, then roared to life for the first time in decades, but this wasn't the healthy rumble of a restored machine. This was the sound of an engine being pushed far beyond its limits, building toward catastrophic failure. "Clear the area," Carter shouted, but Ben was already moving, not away from the tractor, but toward it. Because in that moment of crisis, he'd remembered one last note in his father's ledger. "When all else fails, trust the kill switch under the seat, the one that looks like it's always been broken." Time seemed to slow as Ben ran toward the overloading tractor. The machine's engine screamed in protest, decades-old metal straining against forces it was never meant to contain. Heat rippled from its hood in visible waves, and something deep inside made an ominous cracking sound. "Dad, wait!" Sarah's voice barely carried over the mechanical chaos. The woman's team scattered as electrical arcs began dancing between the tractor's frame and the wet ground. Their leader stood her ground, thumb still pressed firmly on the device's trigger, face illuminated by the growing flames under the hood. "Stay back," she warned, but her voice betrayed uncertainty. This wasn't the controlled destruction she'd planned. The tractor's modifications were interacting with her device in unexpected ways, creating a chain reaction that threatened to consume everything. Ben reached the tractor's side, his work-worn hands finding familiar holds despite the heat. One chance, that's all he had. The kill switch under the seat had been broken for so long that no one thought about it anymore. Just another piece of a long-dead machine. But his father never kept truly broken things around the farm. A searing bolt of electricity grounded itself through the frame, throwing Ben backward. He hit the muddy ground hard, ears ringing, the taste of ozone sharp on his tongue. "Shut it down!" Carter was shouting at the woman. "Whatever you triggered, it's affecting the whole power grid." She shook her head, desperation replacing calculation in her eyes. "I can't. The system's locked into an overload cycle. This is what we trained for. Controlled demolition if the evidence couldn't be secured. There's nothing controlled about this," Sarah said, helping Ben to his feet. All around the farm, lights were flickering as the power surge built. The distant sirens grew louder, multiple agencies racing toward what their instruments must be registering as a significant electrical anomaly. The woman's device sparked and died in her hand, but the damage was done. The tractor's engine had become a roaring inferno, its steel frame glowing dull red in places. Decades of hidden compartments and secret modifications were turning the simple machine into a bomb. "Last chance," Ben gasped, fighting through the pain of electrical burns. "Help me reach that kill switch or lose everything." An explosion from the generator shed lit up the night. Jake's voice crackled over the CB. "Power grid's critical. Whatever you're gonna do it fast." The woman looked at her failed device, then at her retreating team, and finally at the approaching vehicles. In that moment, Ben saw past her carefully constructed facade to someone who'd spent a career trying to contain other people's secrets, only to watch them explode. "Under the seat?" she asked quietly. Ben nodded. Together they approached the tractor from opposite sides, using their bodies to shield each other from the worst of the electrical discharges. The heat was unbearable now, paint bubbling off the metal in sheets. "The lever's rusted," Ben shouted over the noise. "Needs 2 people." The woman nodded, reaching through the flames. Their hands found the hidden switch together, decades of corrosion, fighting against desperate strength. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. "The ledger! Dad! The sequence!" Ben's mind raced back to the last page, to numbers that hadn't made sense until now. Down, up, down, hold! They worked the lever in sequence, muscles straining. Just when it seemed impossible, something deep in the tractor's core clicked. The engine's roar transformed into a dying wheeze, then silence. The sudden quiet was deafening. Rain fell on hot metal, creating clouds of steam that shrouded the yard in an otherworldly haze. Through it all, a new sound emerged. Vehicles pulling up, doors slamming, voices calling orders. "Time's up," the woman said softly, looking at her burned hands. "For all of us." But Sarah was smiling, that same quiet smile her mother used to wear, when all the numbers finally added up. Maybe not. She held up the ledger, open to its final page. Grandpa left one last failsafe, a way to prove who was really on which side when it mattered. Ben looked at the woman, understanding dawning. You weren't trying to destroy evidence. You were trying to protect the people who never turned, who stayed loyal all these years, the ones who'd be exposed if the wrong list fell into the wrong hands. She met his gaze for a long moment, then nodded almost imperceptibly. Some secrets are worth burning for, and some truths are worth saving, no matter the cost. Through the steam and rain, figures emerged. Federal agents, intelligence, officers, representatives from agencies whose existence was barely acknowledged, all converging on the farm, drawn by the promise of answers to 30-year-old questions. But standing there in the aftermath, Ben realized they'd already found the most important answer. Why his father had chosen to protect not just information, but the human stories behind it. Now it was their turn to decide which stories would be told and which secrets would remain buried in the heart of an old John Deere tractor. The miller's kitchen had never hosted such an unlikely gathering. Federal agents occupied every available chair, while intelligence officers lined the walls. In the center of the table lay a single sheet of paper, a document recovered from the tractor's hidden compartment before the agencies could establish jurisdiction. "Operation Harvest," Carter read aloud. That's what they called it, using agricultural equipment to move people and information across the Iron Curtain. The woman, who had finally identified herself as Diana Kovacs, sat with her burned hands bandaged, her tactical gear incongruous against the homey backdrop of family photos. It was brilliant in its simplicity. Who searches farm equipment? Who questions when tractors cross state lines? When combines move with the harvest season? Sarah spread her grandfather's ledger beside the recovered document. But it wasn't just about moving people, was it? This was about creating a long-term intelligence network. The longest-running domestic intelligence operation in U.S. history confirmed a gray-haired man who'd arrived in an unmarked helicopter. His ID badge carried CIA credentials, but his manner suggested even higher connections. And now, thanks to recent events in Moscow, it's all unraveling. Ben studied the document, seeing his father's careful handwriting in the margins. The names on this list, they're not just Soviet defectors, are they? Diana shook her head. They're American citizens now, doctors, scientists, government officials. People who built new lives, who've served this country loyally for decades. But some of their colleagues, she glanced at the CIA man. Some of their colleagues were plants, he finished. Long-term sleeper agents who use the same network to infiltrate key positions. Your father's records were the only way to tell them apart. And now those sleeper agents are climbing the last rungs of power, Carter added, ready to access classified information, influence policy decisions. Which is why certain parties were so desperate to destroy these records, Sarah concluded, while others wanted to expose everything, regardless of the consequences. Thunder rattled the windows as the storm intensified. Through the rain-streaked glass, they could see teams of agents examining every piece of equipment on the farm, searching for more hidden compartments, more buried secrets. "There's something I don't understand," Ben said finally. "Why did Dad keep such detailed records?" "Why take the risk?" Diana's expression softened. "Because he understood something crucial about intelligence work, Mr. Miller. Information is worthless without context. Names and dates mean nothing without the human element. Who can be trusted, who remained loyal, who chose principle over power. Your father didn't just record facts," the CIA man added. "He documented character. Every person who came through this farm, he evaluated them, watched how they handled stress, how they treated others, whether they kept their word." Sarah found herself blinking back tears as she remembered her father's quiet way of sizing people up, how he seemed to look past surfaces to something deeper. "And now we have a choice to make," Diana said, looking around the kitchen. "These records could expose the sleeper agents, yes, but they would also destroy the lives of hundreds of loyal people who risked everything for freedom, people who've earned their place in this country." "What about justice?" Carter asked. "What about accountability?" The CIA man's laugh was bitter. "Justice, the people who orchestrated this infiltration are mostly dead or retired. The only ones who would suffer are the innocent families caught." In the middle, Ben thought about his father's careful record-keeping, his attention to human detail. "Then maybe we're asking the wrong question," he said slowly. "Maybe it's not about exposing everyone or protecting everyone. Maybe it's about using this information the way Dad did, to understand who people really are when everything is on the line." Sarah's eyes lit up with sudden understanding. She flipped to the last page of the ledger, where a series of numbers had puzzled them earlier. "It's not a destruction sequence," she said. "It's a code for separating the lists, for telling the complete truth about some while protecting others who deserve protection. Like a harvest," Ben said quietly. "Separating wheat from chaff." Diana and the CIA man exchanged looks. Outside, the storm began to ease, as if nature itself was acknowledging the weight of the moment. The future of countless lives, the balance of power in hidden corridors of influence, all hanging on the decisions made tonight in a Nebraska farm kitchen. The true legacy of Operation Harvest was not the secrets it had moved, or the lives it had shaped, but the moral challenge it now presented. How to serve both justice and mercy, how to protect the innocent while exposing the guilty, how to honor the careful wisdom of a farmer who had understood that the most important crop was truth itself. Sheriff Thompson's body camera captured everything that happened next. The footage would later become crucial evidence, though not in the way anyone expected. "All units hold position," Thompson's voice crackled over the radio. "We've got movement at all access points." Through the rain-streaked windows of the command center, they watched the farm come alive with coordinated purpose. Pete Anderson's combine rolled into position near the south fence, its massive frame blocking any escape route. Mary Wilson's trucks created a barrier across the eastern approach, while Jake's equipment sealed off the west. "What are they doing?" the CIA man demanded, watching the monitors. "What we've always done," Ben replied. "Protecting our own." Diana studied the tactical display with professional appreciation. "They're creating a controlled space, limiting options." Sarah was already working at the command center's main console, her fingers flying over the keyboard. The farm's security cameras, far more sophisticated than anyone had suspected, clicked through multiple views, revealing a perfect containment. Operation executed by people who'd spent lifetimes working this land together. "Got another vehicle approaching," Carter reported. "Diplomatic plates." "Right on schedule," Diana murmured. The sleek black sedan pulled up to the makeshift barrier of farm equipment. A distinguished-looking man emerged, his expensive suit incongruous in the muddy farmyard. Even through the grainy camera feed, his fury was evident as he found his path blocked by Jake's grain truck. "Senator Morrison," the CIA man said quietly, "head of the Intelligence Oversight Committee, and the highest-ranking sleeper agent we've identified," Diana added. Thompson's body camera caught the senator's approach to the command center. His face shifted from anger to careful control as he recognized the gathering inside. "This is a serious breach of national security," he began. But Sarah cut him off by playing archived footage on the main screen. The same man, 30 years younger, stepping out of a hidden compartment in a combine harvester. The timestamp and location data were crystal clear, as was the sequence of coded signals he exchanged with his Soviet handlers. "Dad didn't just keep written records," Sarah explained. "He kept video. Every transaction, every exchange, all documented." With timestamps and authentication codes, the senator's mask cracked. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. The people I represent are very interested in what happens next," Diana interrupted, nodding toward the approaching helicopters. "Your colleagues in Moscow are particularly concerned about what might be revealed if these records become public." Ben stepped forward, his father's ledger in hand. "But it's not going to come to that, because we're going to do this the right way. The way Dad would have wanted." Through Thompson's camera, they watched understanding dawn on the senator's face as Ben laid out the terms: quiet resignation, full cooperation in identifying other sleeper agents, in exchange for protecting the identities of legitimate defectors and their families. "And why would I agree to this?" Morrison asked. "Because of them," Ben said, gesturing to the farmers in their equipment, still maintaining their perfect containment circle. "These people, they're witnesses now, salt of the Earth Americans who've seen everything. You really want to try explaining away their testimony?" The senator looked around the command center, at the CIA man who'd once been his ally, at Diana whose loyalty he'd never questioned, at the local law enforcement officers with their active body cameras, and at the farming community that had outmaneuvered his entire network. "You understand?" he said finally. "There will be consequences. People in high places are about to learn what happens when they underestimate rural intelligence," Sarah finished. She switched to a different camera view, showing more community members arriving. "Every farmer within 50 miles is watching. This place now. Try to bury this, and they'll make sure the story spreads across every agricultural network in the country." Thompson's footage caught the moment the senator's resistance crumbled. It recorded his quiet cooperation as Diana and Carter began the formal process of taking him into custody. But most importantly, it documented the dignity with which the farming community handled their victory, not with gloating or anger, but with the same quiet competence they brought to every task. As the helicopters landed and federal agents began securing the scene, Ben stepped out into the muddy yard. One by one, his neighbors drove their equipment back to their own farms, each passing by to exchange a nod or a quiet word. No grand speeches, no celebrations, just the shared understanding that they had done what needed doing. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a clean, cool night. The old John Deere sat silent once more, its hidden compartments now empty of everything except history. But as Ben watched his community dissolve back into the darkness, he realized that the real strength of his father's legacy had never been in the secrets it kept, but in the people it had brought together to protect what mattered most. The evidence log grew longer by the hour. In the miller's barn, now converted into a secure operations center, Sarah worked alongside federal analysts, methodically processing 30 years of her grandfather's documentation. Every equipment transfer, every hidden compartment, every covert exchange, all meticulously recorded and cross-referenced. "Your father's coding system was ingenious," Diana said, examining a particularly complex series of maintenance records. He used parts numbers as a classification system. Each legitimate defector was logged under routine maintenance, while the sleeper agents were coded as non-standard modifications. Ben watched from the barn door as teams catalogued the recovered materials. "How many have you identified so far?" 28 sleeper agents in active positions, Carter reported, hanging up his phone. Senator Morrison's cooperation opened the floodgates. Once he started talking, others realized the game was up. Through the barn's wide doors, they could see more unmarked vehicles arriving at farms across the county. Each piece of modified equipment was being carefully examined, yielding new evidence with every inspection. "The remarkable thing," the CIA man said, reviewing another file, "is how your father protected the legitimate defectors. Their new identities, their families, their lives, all concealed within normal agricultural records. Even we can't unscramble those without the specific key." Sarah smiled, remembering her father's quiet persistence in teaching her about proper record-keeping. He used to say farming was about protecting what grows. Guess he meant more than just crops. A commotion outside drew their attention. Pete, Henderson's truck pulled up, loaded with what looked like ordinary farm equipment. But the federal agents swarmed it immediately, their scanners lighting up. "Found these in my back 40, Pete called out. "Figured they might be important." The equipment turned out to be more modified pieces, each containing carefully preserved documents. The sleeper agents had been so focused on the Miller farm, they'd forgotten how many other properties might hold pieces of the puzzle. "It's not just here," Carter said, checking his tablet. "We're getting reports from farms across 3 states. Everyone's checking their old equipment, finding things hidden in plain sight for decades." Diana nodded approvingly. "A distributed archive. Even if they'd succeeded in destroying everything here, they couldn't have contained it all." The CIA man looked troubled. "The scale of this. There will be pressure to expose everything." "Certain parties will want to use this for political advantage, regardless of the human cost." "No," Ben said firmly. "We stick to the plan. The sleeper agents face justice, but the legitimate defectors stay protected. That's non-negotiable." "And how do you plan to enforce that?" the CIA man asked. Sarah held up a thumb drive. "Because the decryption key for Dad's records, it's not just a code. It's tied to specific equipment sequences. Try to access the wrong files, and the data corrupts itself." She smiled. "Dad believed in both justice and mercy. He built the system so you couldn't have one without the other." The barn fell silent as the implications sank in. Decades of intelligence work, countless lives and secrets, all protected by a farmer's understanding of both human nature and mechanical systems. Through the afternoon, more evidence arrived from surrounding farms. Each piece was carefully logged, each discovery adding to the growing picture of how deep the sleeper network had reached, and how thoroughly Ben's father had documented it all. "They're starting arrests in Washington," Carter reported. "Quiet. And no press, no drama, just people being called into meetings that end with handcuffs." Diana watched the process with professional appreciation. "This is how it should be done. Surgical precision, not a witch hunt. The guilty face consequences while the innocent remain protected." Ben picked up an old work order his father had written decades ago. The parts numbers, he now realized, were anything but random. Each digit told a story of someone's loyalty, courage, and choices. "You know what this means for the farm," Sarah said quietly. "Once this is all processed, classified, we'll never be just farmers again." But Ben wasn't worried. Through the barn doors, he could see his neighbors still arriving with pieces of evidence, still working together to unravel a decades-old mystery. The farm hadn't been just a farm for a long time. It had been a sanctuary, a gateway to freedom, an archive of human courage and betrayal. And now, as the sun set on another Nebraska evening, it was becoming something else, a testament to how justice and mercy could coexist if people cared enough to make it happen. The Pleasant Valley Diner reopened a week after the arrests. Dottie had insisted people needed a place to talk, to make sense of what had happened. The regulars took their usual seats, but the conversations were anything but usual. "Got another thank you card," Pete announced, sliding an envelope across the counter. "Family in Oregon. Says their grandfather came through here in '85. Doctor now, got kids in medical school." Ben added it to the growing stack. Ever since the story had quietly spread through certain circles, letters had been arriving from across the country. Children and grandchildren of those his father had helped, reaching out to express gratitude that could finally be voiced. 3 more equipment inspections today," Mary Wilson said, pouring herself coffee. "FBI's being real particular about documenting everything before they haul it away." Sarah, who'd been working with the federal teams to process the evidence, nodded. "They're building a complete picture, making sure nothing gets missed this time." The diner's door chimed. Diana walked in, now dressed in civilian clothes, her hands still showing faint burns from the night at the tractor. The regulars made room for her at the counter without comment. She'd earned her place during the past week, working alongside them to ensure the investigation remained focused and fair. "Moscow's starting to respond," she said quietly. "Internal investigations, very discreet. Seems they're as interested in cleaning house as we are." "Any word on Kozlov?" Ben asked. "Alive. Under protection. Apparently he's being quite helpful. Now that certain facts have come to light." She accepted a coffee from Dottie. "Your father's records are changing a lot of long-held assumptions on both sides." Through the windows, they could see the Miller farm in the distance. Federal teams still came and went, but the activity was winding down. Soon, it would just be a farm again, albeit one with a very different kind of history. "Got something for you," Jake said, pulling a folder from his jacket. "I found it in my shop records. That tractor your dad brought in back in '86. I kept the work order. Thought you might want it." Ben opened the folder. His father's signature was there, along with detailed notes about the modifications they now understood were never just about farming. But in the margins, in his father's careful hand, was something else. "Remember, the real harvest is hope." Sarah blinked back tears. "He never gave up believing in people, did he? Even after everything he saw." "That's what made the system work," Diana observed. "He didn't just track what people did. He understood why they did it, made better judgments about who could be trusted." The diner's conversations shifted to more normal topics: weather patterns, equipment maintenance, the upcoming harvest. But there was a new undertone to everything, a deeper appreciation for the complexity that could lie beneath ordinary surfaces. Buck, now fully recovered, lay by the diner door, His ability to spot unfamiliar vehicles approaching had proven invaluable during the investigation. Now he just watched contentedly as his community began the process of returning to normal. "You know," Pete said thoughtfully, "we're going to have to figure out how to talk about all this. Can't exactly put it in the county history books." "Maybe." "We don't need to," Ben replied. "Maybe it's enough that we know, that we remember what it means to protect something bigger than ourselves." Sheriff Thompson entered, carrying a stack of letters. More thank you notes, more stories of lives touched by what had happened on these farms. He'd been instrumental in keeping the press away, letting the investigation proceed without sensation or speculation. "Got word from Carter," he announced. "Last of the sleeper agents is in custody. Clean sweep, no loose ends. And not a single legitimate family exposed." A quiet satisfaction settled over the diner. They'd done what needed doing, protected what needed protecting. The world would never know the full story of what had happened here, but maybe that was right. Some harvests were meant to be measured in changed lives rather than public acclaim. Outside, afternoon sun gleamed off the tractors and combines that had played their part in the operation. To anyone passing by, they looked like ordinary farm equipment, but the people in the diner knew better now. They understood that ordinary things could carry extraordinary purposes, and that the richest legacy wasn't what you kept, but what you chose to protect. A month after the last federal agents left, Sarah stood in the farmyard, painting a new sign. The crisp autumn breeze carried the scent of harvest, and somewhere in the distance, a combine was working its way through golden fields. The sign read, "Miller and Daughter Farm Equipment Restoration." "Perfect timing," Ben said, walking up with 2 mugs of coffee. "Jake just called. He's got 3 more vintage tractors coming in next week." Their new business had emerged organically from the aftermath. With their expertise in old equipment now publicly known, if not the full reason for it, farmers from across the Midwest were bringing their restoration projects to the Miller farm. "Did you see the latest modifications?" Diana suggested. Sarah asked, accepting the coffee. She gestured to blueprints spread out on a workbench. "Ways to make the compartments look like normal repairs, just in case anyone ever needs them again." Ben nodded. After the dust settled, Diana had stayed on as a security consultant. Her expertise, combined with the Miller family's mechanical knowledge, was creating a new generation of secure transport solutions, just in case the world ever needed them again. The old John Deere stood in a place of honor near the new workshop. They'd restored it properly this time, though certain modifications remained carefully hidden. It served as both monument and reminder, drawing knowing glances from occasional visitors who arrived with letters of introduction from very specific agencies. "Carter called," Ben said, watching Sarah put the finishing touches on the sign. "They're expanding the rural surveillance network. Asked if we'd consider being a training site." Sarah's brush paused mid-stroke. "What did you tell him?" "Said we'd think about it. Might be good to have a hand in teaching the next generation how to do this right, with humanity, like Dad did." A truck pulled into the yard, Jake's flatbed carrying what looked like a rusted-out farmel. But both Ben and Sarah noticed how carefully he was handling it, how the weight distribution seemed off for a normal tractor. "Special delivery," Jake called out, climbing down. This one came with interesting paperwork. He handed Sarah a folder with familiar coding in its serial numbers. "Still finding them," she marveled. "After all this time." "People protect what matters," Ben said quietly. Dad understood that. It's why he built things to last, to be found. When they were needed, they'd converted one of the old storage buildings into a secure documentation center, its walls now lined with restored equipment manuals and farming records. To most visitors, it looked like a typical agricultural archive, but hidden within the ordinary paperwork was a carefully preserved history of extraordinary courage. Buck barked a greeting as Mary Wilson's truck appeared on the horizon. She'd been coordinating with other farming communities, creating a network. of equipment restoration experts who understood the importance of discretion and careful documentation. "Got something interesting from that family in Oregon," she called out, waving a letter. "Seems their grandfather left something behind when he came through, something they think belongs here." She handed Sarah a small package. Inside was a worn pocket watch, its case inscribed with initials that matched one of the entries in Ben's father's ledger. With it was a note. "Keep it running. We'll add it to the collection," Sarah said softly. They dedicated a small corner of the workshop to such mementos, pieces of lives transformed, carefully preserved alongside the equipment that had helped make those transformations possible. The new sign gleamed in the autumn sun as Sarah made her final brushstrokes, but it wasn't just advertising a restoration business, it was declaring something more, that the Miller farm would continue its legacy of preservation and protection, adapted for a new era but true to its original purpose. "You know," Ben said, studying the sign, "Mom would have loved this. She always said you had her head for business." "And your heart for helping people," Sarah added, "like Grandpa did." Together they watched Jake and Mary begin unloading the mysterious farmhall. Its rusted exterior held secrets that would soon be carefully documented and preserved, adding another chapter to a story that stretched back decades. The Miller farm was changing, but its core mission remained the same: to protect what mattered, to preserve not just machinery, but memory, and to stand ready for whatever the future might bring. The next generation of secrets would be different, but the principles of their protection would remain as solid as the Nebraska soil itself. The photographer from the County Historical Society adjusted his camera one last time. Ready for the family portrait? Ben, Sarah, and Buck gathered in front of the restored John Deere, now gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Diana stood off to the side, watching with a hint of a smile. The photo would show 3 generations of Millers, Ben and Sarah in the present, the tractor representing his father's legacy, and in the background, the new sign promising a future that honored them. Both. "Should we include the latest arrival?" Sarah asked, nodding toward a canvas-covered shape in the workshop. Ben considered this. Just that morning they'd received a special delivery, a tractor from a government auction, its paperwork marked with subtle codes that Diana had taught them to recognize. The world, it seemed, still needed safe passages and quiet sanctuaries. No, he decided, some stories are still being written. After the photographer left, the real work of the day began. Carter arrived with a new trainee, a young agent who needed to understand how rural communities could be the perfect hiding place for vital operations. Mary and Pete brought coffee and Dottie's homemade pie, settling in for what had become a regular teaching session. "The key," Ben explained to the young agent, "isn't the equipment or the modifications. It's understanding people, knowing who to trust, how to help, when to look the other way." Sarah opened her laptop, showing carefully curated documentation. "Every restoration project tells a story. The trick is learning to read between the lines." The agent looked overwhelmed. "How do you keep track of it all?" "The same way Dad did," Ben said. "One person at a time, one story at a time. The machinery is just the framework. It's the human element that matters." Diana, who'd been quietly observing, added her perspective. "What the Millers created here isn't just a business or a safe house. It's a template for how to protect people while preserving community, balance, discretion, and above all, humanity." Through the workshop windows, they could see Thompson's patrol car making its regular rounds. The sheriff had become an essential part of their security system, his ordinary presence deflecting unwanted attention from the extraordinary work being done. Buck suddenly perked up, ears twitching. Moments later, they heard a vehicle approaching. Jake's truck, carrying what appeared to be ordinary farming equipment, but the way he drove, careful and deliberate, told them this delivery was anything but ordinary. "That's our cue," Carter said, gathering his trainee. "Remember what you learned here. Sometimes the best way to hide something important is to keep it in plain sight. After they left, Ben and Sarah helped Jake unload his cargo. The broken equipment would soon be documented, restored, and prepared for whatever purpose had brought it to their farm. Some things never changed. "Got something else for you," Jake said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. Inside was a black and white photograph from 1975, the day the John Deere first arrived at the Miller farm. But this copy showed more than the familiar scene of Ben's father and grandfather. In the background, clearly visible, were other faces. They now recognized younger versions of the people who'd built this network, who'd trusted a Nebraska farmer with their greatest secrets. "Found it in Mom's old albums," Jake explained. "Thought it belonged here." Sarah took the photo to their memorial corner, placing it carefully among the other pieces of their growing historical collection. The pocket watch from Oregon gleamed. Nearby, still keeping perfect time, Ben stood in the workshop doorway, watching the sun set over his family's land. The fields that had once hidden roots to freedom now grew new crops of trust and possibility. The equipment that had once smuggled people to safety now preserved their stories for future generations. "Dad would be proud," Sarah said, joining him, "not just of what we protected, but of what we're building." Diana appeared with fresh coffee, her occasional role as security consultant having evolved into something closer to family. "Speaking of building," she said, "that last delivery came with some interesting specifications. Seems there's a new generation of people who need help finding their way to freedom." Ben smiled, understanding. The world might have changed, but the need for quiet heroes and secret passages remained. The Miller farm would continue serving its dual purpose, preserving the past while preparing for the future. "Well then," he said, "let's get to work." As they moved into the workshop, Buck took up his guard position by the door. Outside, combines rolled through distant fields, their familiar rhythm masking other, more subtle operations. The old John Deere stood witness, its restored frame containing mysteries that would never be fully revealed. Some might see just another small farm in Nebraska. But for those who knew where to look, who understood what to look for, the Miller farm represented something timeless. The courage to protect what matters, the wisdom to preserve what's precious, and the strength to keep helping others find their way home.